Very good news for the fans of Hans Niemann, as Hans is back at the board playing a new top tournament, this time on African soil. He is in Tunisia playing the Djerba Festival Masters Tournament. It's an 8-player event, all play all, round robin. And in round 1, Hans is playing against number 2 of Norway, Grandmaster Niemann and Tari. It's a really exciting game. Some very unusual things are happening, so I'm pretty sure you're gonna like it. And I will just guide you through the highlights of this game. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and also make sure that you will follow this event, as I'm expecting more fireworks to come in the next game. So let's have a look. Hans is playing with the white pieces, starts the game with 1d4. It's a classical time control, 90 minutes plus 30 seconds increment. And well, let's see what happens. d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, and here, small surprise, the move g3. So this is leading to the main lines of the Catalan. That's what you would expect, yeah, if the bishop comes to g2 and then later c4. But since black has not played the move e6 yet, the bishop gets out to f5. This is considered to be one of the main moves, and now almost automatically everybody plays here the move bishop g2, but Hans has a completely different take on this position as he goes for the move knight h4. This is very surprising move, and according to my information this has never been played by a grandmaster. Well, the idea is that he's hitting this bishop, but the question is also if that knight is not stranded now at the side of the board. Well, let's have a look. Bishop e4 played, attacking the rook on h1. White goes for the move f3, hitting the bishop, and the bishop goes back to g6. So here we have this typical situation where the knight can take on g6 and black is ready to take back with the h-pawn, and well, then things are clear. But now white is not going to take yet. White has a different idea, and I think what Hans is doing is very interesting. Let's see. He played the move c4. So he wants to gain control over the center by trading off that pawn on d5. So for instance, if if black is going to take on c4, then white is going to play here the move e4. So occupying the center with 2 pawns, and here you see one of the advantages not having played the bishop to g2 yet, as very soon white is about to take the pawn on c4 and just keep on developing, and with a nice pawn center, white has reasonable chances to fight for the initiative. So after the move c4, there are different ways of playing. And here, Tari spent 23 minutes trying to figure out what to do. Maybe he should defend the pawn one way or another, but look what he did. He played here the move c5. So now there's full tension in the center. How is white gonna react? Well, if you do take the pawn on c5, black's plan then in that case is to advance the pawn to d4, and that really makes it harder for the knight to get into play. Very soon e5 will be played and black will try to regain the pawn, so black is having excellent prospects in that case. So this was not played in the game, and instead Hans decided here to take first on g6. Black takes back with the h-pawn, and now pawn takes d5. Interesting idea, of course. And what is black going to do? Well, there are different options. You can take with the queen, you can take with a knight, or you can take on d4. And the latter move was played by Tari in the game. Just want to point out that I think queen takes d5 is maybe an easier way of playing to put pressure against the pawn on d4, and likely queens will be swapped at some point very soon. So I think that's very interesting and a more pragmatic way of playing. But here Tari played the move c takes d4, hoping that after, let's say, a move like queen takes d4, you're just able to take with the queen yourself on d5 and black is alright. But now Hans played very principled move e4. He doesn't want to give up the pawn on d5, defends it with its pawn on e4, and well, here pawn takes e3 played, so that if you do take back, well, the pawn on d5 will be taken and black will be a pawn up. But first things first, the knight first gets out to c3. It's protecting the pawn on d5, and this pawn on d5 makes it really much harder for black to complete development. Well, rook h5 was played in the game. So the rook is activated now, attacking the pawn from the side, hitting that pawn on d5. And here bishop b5, check is played first. Clever idea, forcing black to cover the check with the move knight bd7. And now the queen no longer hits that pawn on d5. And look what happens. g4, hitting the rook on h5. And now strange things are about to happen. Where is the rook going? The rook could even go to e5 to protect the pawn. But now after queen d4, this rook is just in serious trouble. The knight is not a good defender because it's pinned. So that was not played in the game, and instead rook to h3 was the move by Tari, with the idea that white doesn't have time here to take that pawn on e3. If you do that, well, it's knight takes g4. This is the main idea behind that rook being placed on h3. The pawn on f3 is pinned. If you do take the knight, it's rook takes e3 and black is alright. So after rook h3, instead of taking the pawn, look what happens here. The bishop, which just has been developed, goes back all the way to f1 to kick that rook back. Rook goes to h8 and only now the pawn on e3 is taken. And here, let's try to analyze what's going on. It's move 14, but black is already in huge trouble. Why? Because, well, this pawn on d5, it's a really annoying pawn. It has a massive grip, makes it difficult for the bishop to get into the game. If you ever play e6 or e5, white is going to take on e6. And then if you have to take back, you end up with weak pawns on e6 and g6. So the pawn on d5 makes the difference. White has a lot of extra space for its pieces and open position with the bishop pair. So black, in trouble, decided here to play the move g5. Remarkable idea. Sacrificing a pawn. White captures the pawn on g5. But at least now g6 can be played with the idea to get the bishop out to g7. And then at least the bishop is able to exert pressure along that diagonal. But now Hans playing very actively by playing the move d6. I like that idea a lot. So he's giving the pawn back with the idea to destabilize that knight on f6. If you do take the pawn, something like bishop b5 can be played here with tremendous pressure on both knights. Even with ideas maybe to give a check on e2 or maybe knight d5. White is having a great time here. After d6, instead of capturing the pawn, black played the move queen b6, hitting the pawn on b2. But, well, there are various interesting moves. Look what happens. Rook c1 is played. And here you see that white is trying to generate some play on this c-file. Maybe at some point the knight can even come to b5 with the idea to come into c7 and give a check. So there's not too much time for black to go on a pawn hunt. Let's say, for instance, even if you take the pawn on d6, queens can be exchanged. And white will just continue with a move like king f2. Material's even now, but still there are a lot of aggressive attacking ideas, including knight to b5 with a knight forecoming, or bishop b5 getting the rook to e1. And keep in mind that this rook on the h-file has already moved, so black cannot castle kingside, while castling queenside is also not really attractive because of that open c-file. Anyway, this didn't happen. Black didn't capture the pawn. a6 was played. White played the move queen d2. And I think still taking the pawn on d6, it's not really attractive. In that case, for instance, you can continue in the same way. And I really think that potentially these bishops, they're really, really good with a potential to exert pressure on different sides of the board. So here, Tari played a totally different move. He played the move e6 to attack the pawn on d6 with the bishop and the queen. Is the pawn weak or not? Well, rook d1, simple move, just supporting that d pawn. And not that the pawn is going to promote anytime soon, but it's getting harder for black to complete development. Bishop g7. And look at this queen. This queen on b6 is doing a great job. It's preventing white from ever castling, and therefore it's harder now still to bring all the pieces into the game, but Hans comes up with a nice idea. Bishop e3, the bishop comes back, hits the queen, queen goes to a5, and now bishop e2. So now the bishops are doing great. And after knight e5, well, you see that the bishop protects the pawn on f3. Knight takes f3 is not a dangerous threat anymore. Now the bishop protects the pawn. King f1. This is the idea. The king comes to g2. Knight fd7. And now king g2. I like it. It's a nice way of castling in an artificial way. And why White is playing in this way becomes clear very soon, because the rook will be needed on h1. Rook c8. And now rook c1. The rook was no longer needed on the d file. The pawn is sufficiently defended. The rook opposes the rook on c8. And here you gotta be careful. What should black do? You're not allowed to castle because this rook on h8 has already moved. And for instance, a move like b5 would probably run into knight takes b5. Nice tactics here. The queen can't be taken here because of rook takes c8 with checkmate. And instead, if you do take the rook on c1, well, then the queen on a5 is hanging. White is winning as well. So difficult to say what black should do. Maybe move like knight c6 to keep the file closed. But I think black's position is quite passive and depressive as well. So black dropped back with the queen to d8. Maybe there are ideas here to get a queen involved. I'm not sure what the exact plan is. Anyway, knight e4 played. So now there's always the possibility for white to exchange rooks. Therefore, the queen cannot come to h4 here yet. Knight c6 played. And now, look at this rook. The move h4 is played. So white is announcing some plans here to break open the king side with a move like h5. And the key idea is that rook takes h4 is met by bishop g5, double attack, winning material. So that is not possible. And after h4, black instead played here the move king f8. How should white continue here? He can of course consider to continue playing on that side of the board, but you're not in a rush. You have a great position, and Hans expands to the other side of the board here by playing the move b4, grabbing space there as well. Nice idea. Knight f6 played. But now the knight comes into c5, hits another pawn on b7. And note, of course, that white is already a pawn up. The situation becomes worse and worse every move for black. Knight e5 to interfere on the d file, having the possibility to take the bishop or take the pawn on d6. But now, knight takes b7, attacking the queen. Queen d7, and now it's bishop takes a6. Well, the position is just falling apart. Even the pawn can come to b5 next if you don't take it. So knight c takes b4, but now rook takes c8, queen takes c8, and now the rook comes over to the other side. It's easier to attack via the queen side because that rook on h8 is out of play. So therefore I like the switch of sides here by white. Queen d7 played, trying to block the pawn. But now, beautiful idea. Rook c7. White is just continuing here. Look at this. Crazy ideas are happening. Knight takes c7. Just giving up the rook on c7. But the idea is to play here knight c5. Attacking the queen. And this queen on d2 is now supporting the d pawn. And that's because the knight is no longer on d5. So that's the main idea of the rook sacrifice. The queen got a move. The queen went back to d8, and now you always got to reckon with queen takes h4 ideas that might be unpleasant. You don't want to think about it. So rather than taking on b4, for instance, the knight, which is hanging already, there follow the move bishop g5, and I think that's a very clever idea to hit the queen. And where is the queen going? There are not that many good options. Let's have a look. If you move the queen to b8, well, then it's knight d7 with a knight fork. That is not recommendable. If you go with a queen to a8, you can take the knight on c7. And there are so many threats, including just to get a new queen or play the move queen d8. And in both cases, white just wins a lot of material, or it will be checkmate. So that's also not good. If the queen goes to e8, well, then the pawn comes to the 7th rank with tempo, hitting the queen. So there are no good moves. Maybe you can block the threat that your queen is attacked by the bishop. But if you play bishop f6, bishops are getting swapped, and there's this knight fork on d7 again, winning the queen. That's completely lost. So, well, maybe something like f6 could be played, but this also doesn't look like it's much fun. You can do probably a lot of things, including just to take on c7. That's a very nice idea, so that the pawn hits the queen. If you take on c7, well, there is knight takes e6, and you're winning the queen as well. While if you do take on d2, the queens are getting exchanged, but then the c-pawn will be promoted anyway. So that's why after the move bishop g5, Tari resigned. And I think this was a very convincing way of winning the game. Very nicely played by Hans. Let me know in the comments what you think of this game. Are you following this tournament? Let me know. And very soon I will keep you updated. Bring you the latest games from the Djerba Festival Master. So see you soon again. Bye bye.